Matthew 18:15 through 17 in the Christian Standard Bible say, "If your brother sins against you, go tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he listens to you, you have won your brother. But if he won't listen, take one or two others with you, so that by the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses, every fact may be established. If he doesn't pay attention to them, tell the church. If he doesn't pay attention even to the church, let him be like a Gentile and a tax collector to you." Here, Jesus is instructing his followers on how they should behave with one another. This is sort of an internal political structure that Jesus was setting up. Pastor Will Rose, given that he is God and that his wish is for the church to be united, why would he have given us such instruction rather than just telling us all to remain united in all things?
Well, we believe in the full humanity and divinity of Christ, but I also think about, when I hear this passage, how Matthew is addressing his community of faith. So obviously there's something going on in this community where Matthew feels like he needs to address some infighting or conflict or disagreement that's going on. So he's setting up a formula to help them deal with however they are disagreeing with one another and not getting along. So there is this kind of structure and formula and a way to say, hey, this is how we deal with conflict with one another. We go to our person first and we try to have a conversation about it. And if that doesn't work, then you bring someone along as a witness or someone to hold each other accountable, a third party, and then eventually bring it to the whole community because it affects the whole community. So, he could just snap his fingers and say, be unified, but we're people and people happen and community happens. And we're going to talk about governance and policies because people are going to people, and so we need to have some ways to help us stay in line with each other and work side by side with one another for the greater purpose.
Amen. Hey everybody, welcome to the Whole Church Podcast Roundtable Edition. You guys know I love doing these. We usually do them about every 6 weeks. It's been a while. It's been a while since we had one. Today's table isn't as large as some of the other round tables, but it is very well rounded, in my opinion. Guys, I can't wait to jump into this. This is the Whole Church Podcast. We are joined by your favorite co-host, the one whom Machete got his mustache modeled after, the one and only TJ, Tiberius Juan Blackwell. TJ, how's it going?
Oh, it's going. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I forgot to include some cosmology in there. You know, the cosmic mustache, TJ, Tiberius Juan Blackwell. Yeah. You know, gotta keep it tied together. You know,
I have to have enough mustache for me and Joe.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to.
I'm crossing. I had to reference the cosmology to cross in and give a head nod to our other podcast that we do with Pastor Will Rose, who joins us from Holy Trinity Lutheran Church in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Another member of your round table. And of course, we are also joined by the legendary podcaster, the aficionado of all things beard, the one and only Pastor Joe Day. Joe, how's it going, man?
Not too shabby. Thanks for having me.
Thank you guys for being here. I can't wait to jump into today's topic of polity and procedure and how does the church practically get along. You know, a lot of times we keep our conversations in whole church really almost abstract of, okay, what are our intellectual barriers, or what is it that's like our theology that's different? And when it really comes down to it, a lot of unity is on the grounds. How do we make sense of this and structure our unity in a way that we can actually work together that makes sense? And it comes down to what some people might say is boring stuff. And that's what today's going to be. It's going to be an exciting episode about boring stuff on how to practically do this thing called unity we keep talking about.
Yeah. So if that's the kind of thing that interests you and this sort of talk in general, what interests you more, check out the Honest Ministries Podcast Network. Link is below for other shows like ours or affiliated with ours that aren't like ours at all, if that floats your boat. You can also chat with us on our Discord. Is it also in the notes? It's probably the easiest way to get in touch with us, unless you have our phone number, which you can ask for on Discord. So it's
I'll say if you just get on Discord, unless you seem completely crazy, we'll probably let you text us. I might give you a Google number though. You'll see. We'll see. Just depends. And with that, of course, before we do anything else, we have to exercise a great spiritual gift of silliness, my favorite way, my favorite form of procedure of unity when we talk about a silly question like we like to do on our show. Of course, TJ and I will answer first. Give you time to think about it, guys. Today's question is, if a Canadian goose were to become an Avenger, which Avenger do you think it would be? Actually, TJ, I'm going to make you go last because we're going to do no repeat answers. Everybody has to give an answer, no repeat answer, and my answer is the Hulk, because Canadian geese are just angry. I mean, it's just a thing. They're more powerful than you think they are. They will attack you. So, my answer is the Hulk. Joe, what are we going with? What Avenger would a Canadian goose be?
You absolutely would take mine and then be like, go next.
Yeah. I loved how he
Sorry.
said no repeats and then immediately said his so he could claim it super fast.
Yeah.
You see what he
Yeah.
did there?
Well, I just don't
He
want you
wrote
guys
it
to
in
have
the
anything
outline.
too easy.
He wrote his answer in the outline.
I know.
I was
Yeah.
prepared.
I'm gonna go with Captain America because it would be ironic because it's a Canadian goose.
I do love that
Yeah.
answer, actually.
That's fantastic. Captain
Also,
Canada.
Canadian geese, I'm pretty sure, are from Japan. They're not even from Canada. That's the best
Well,
part.
there you go.
I love them. Will, what's your Canadian goose Avenger?
I'm actually going to go something, this may go against rules, but I'm going to say that my goose is the actual Quinjet that the Avengers ride in because it can fly.
Mhm. Is that
Try
cheating?
again. Yeah, that's cheating. Try again.
No, it's the Quinjet. It is a transformer.
That's a good
Quinjet.
enough.
It's a new transformer that transfers from a goose into a Quinjet and then is a member of the Avengers.
I'll take that only
Yep.
because Transformers did exist in one of the Marvel universes at one point because they had
there you
their
go.
own Spider-Man.
Yeah.
TJ.
Mockingbird. West Coast Avengers.
Funny. I wanted
Well,
someone
then.
to say Hawkeye because we don't need them. Anyway.
I've never seen a goose shoot a bow, or I would have.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
I keep sharing that I think Joshua should create a book of these silly questions and just have, and then
Don't
people.
tell them a secret. This is spoilers. That's a 2024 announcement.
I know 2024 announcement. That way, you could do
Yeah. These are great
breaking the
youth
ice
group
exercises with your communities and
I
youth
sure hope
groups.
no
and-
pastors are taking notes and getting my book for free.
yeah,
I'm gonna charge y'all a lot for this book.
That's right.
That's not
We
true.
used to have.
The thing
we
is, if I
used to
did have a
have
book, I probably would just give it to people.
We used to have a book with all of them.
That's true. I did actually write them all down in a notebook. I need to find that because I need all of them. Anyway, for today's purposes, getting into all the stuff we're going to get into, when we say the church, we mean the collective of everyone who follows Jesus and has accepted salvation. When we say the church, when we say churches, plural, we're probably referring to individual groups of believers that meet together in specific locations and regular basis, like your local congregations. We might clarify throughout the episode, Big C Church or Little C Church. Big C Church is referring to that larger collective of all Christians. Little C is when we talk about these individual congregations. It's probably going to come up a lot and be important today when we're talking about polity, because what we do at a local level and what we do at a more broad level probably going to look pretty different. So that's just some distinctions to make sense of. We might talk about denominational church, that kind of stuff. So we'll be making some of those distinctions, and just remember the big C, little C thing if you're listening. That'll probably help you follow the conversation, I hope. And a lot of people who'd listen to something like this have already heard all that. And if you haven't, congratulations. You're here. We hope you enjoy this. But before we discuss specific things about church polity or anything like that, I think it's useful if we all just kind of go around and briefly, not describe, but just kind of give a definition of how your church polity works. I'm actually going to be bowing out of this for the most part because, I used to be Pentecostal, which just means if I did what I used to be, all my answers are TJ's answers. And I'm now attending the Lutheran church, which means if I do what my current thing is, my answers are just Will's answers. I just, Will knows the answers better. So
Right.
no reason for me to give them. So, Will, let's start with you. You go to a Lutheran, you pastor a Lutheran church. How, what is the term of how, like a Baptist, if Christian was here, they're self-governing churches. How would you describe the type of governance? Governments? Word.
Yeah, we Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief, but just to kind of in context. So in our creeds, we say we believe in one holy Catholic and apostolic church. And by Catholic, we mean universal. So we know that we're a part of the larger church, Big C, like you talked about, but we're also part of the ELCA, the Evangelical Lutheran Church of America. So we're part of a larger denomination, Lutheran denomination. And so part of that, what governs the larger denomination also governs who we are. And then broken down a little further, our congregation is a part of the North Carolina Synod, and synod is just a word that means group together. And so we have a bishop in North Carolina who is kind of like our HR and overseer to the churches who are in North Carolina. And then we're a part of a conference, the Midlands Conference, group with other churches in our conference. And then we have our particular community of faith, the actual church itself, Holy Trinity Lutheran Church and Lutheran Campus Ministry in Chapel Hill. Our church is governed by a church council elected from the congregation. That council is governed by our own church constitution. The church council gathers every month to oversee the business of our church, Holy Trinity, but that is in continuity and conjunction with our Constitution and in the Constitution of the North Carolina Synod and the Constitution of the ELCA. So we are our own body. We own our own land. We own our building, but we're a part of a larger church. So we're kind of a both and, part of a larger national denomination, but we're also self-governing with our own elected council members, ministry teams. We have our own budget and we have our own constitution that governs how we do life and community together as a community of faith in Chapel Hill. Also knowing that that's in continuity with our synodical constitution and also the ELCA constitution as well. I hope that helps some.
Yeah. It's a really interesting question to ask someone who is a part of the ELCA, especially because, if you're familiar with a lot of the non-denominational Baptist churches, they say they're self-governed, and for the most part, they mean it. They don't have to answer to a bishop or anything like that. Their church can just decide to not go to any of the meetings and just, not do anything that the SBC considers heresy, and that's it. They don't have to do anything else if they don't want to.
Right.
And the Lutheran church is interesting because I think my understanding is most Lutheran congregations do have that kind of church council that governs the local congregation, but you still do answer to a bishop and kind of have not quite hierarchical, but kind of like hierarchical-ish. Sounds that kind of.
Yeah, and that bishop is also elected by the synod. So we send representatives from our church to the annual meeting to vote on the synodical budget, to vote on who's going to represent ministry teams and institutions within our synod and the ELCA, but also that bishop is elected by the North Carolina Synod. So they are elected by the people, but they're also they're calling us to be in charge and oversee the governance of what the synod and the congregations that as a part of the synod. So, yeah, we have a national bishop too, housed in Chicago, a part of the ELCA, and she was elected by the ELCA at the ELCA assembly, and that assembly happens every 3 years. So that's something that happens there.
Yeah, crazy. I think the only other person who could have joined the roundtable that would have been just as interesting to answer this question would be our other guest, Joe. Joe, as far as like, I my understanding is you still do some of the home church stuff, but you also work for a church now that has its own meeting place.
So I have two contexts. One is the house church that is a solo. It has become a solo pastor model with a team with basically like an oversight team. What in a in a Sunday morning model may be referred to as elders. We just don't use the term, not specifically for any reason, just don't. It's just an oversight team. Originally we were a two pastor model, but it became one and just never changed. The other context is I have been converted, and I am a part of the Sunday morning model as a pastor, and I'm with a non-denominational 13-year-old church plant. So there is a plurality of pastorship. There's 4 of us on the team. And then there is a team of elders that are being put in place.
Would both the house church and the non-denominational that you're a part of be considered self-governing churches?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There's a church constitution and like the bylaws and all of that kind of stuff that keep the Sunday morning model on the rails. But it is very much the team will bring it to the church body, and then the church body will vote on it on different matters.
Yeah, yeah. TJ, how would you answer this for your church? I grew up in the Church of God of Prophecy. You still kind of attend, I think mostly attend the Church of God of Prophecy there, which is a Pentecostal denomination. Yeah, how would you answer that question?
Yeah. Will you repeat the question? Self-governed?
Yeah,
Mostly.
yeah. It's less of a question and more of a, yeah, how would you describe the way your church is governed?
So, I, not being part of a pastoral team, not 100% sure. It could be different. There could be like a shadow Pentecostal church government that I'm not aware of, but
Funny.
it could be there. The
Yeah, you would
churches
know,
in
I
our
guess.
denomination are all more or less free to do as they please as long as they adhere to our doctrine. They take guidelines from our state teams, like our state pastoral director, state overseer, stuff like that. Uh, they're just given the guidelines. They're like, hey, hit on this. Uh, keep your church safe. Don't start summoning demons. We're good.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference with your church and like your usual SBC church, this is funny because I do actually know a decent amount of it because I was going to try to be a pastor in that denomination and then ended up leaving the denomination. It's a whole thing. But they have state overseers. I was going to say instead of bishops, they do still have bishops, just different. But how
Yeah,
most
we
people
don't do
think of
bishop
bishops as
stuff.
being over areas and having some kind of authority, bishops in the Church of God of Prophecy don't really have any extra authority. A bishop in the Church of God of Prophecy is a pastor who they really liked, so they gave him a cooler title, basically.
That's pretty much true.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
The
just
one that
extra
actually has
cool
more
guy.
authority is the state overseer, who also has to be ordained. But yeah, and the state overseer could at any minute just fire a pastor, move a pastor to another church, that kind of thing. But it doesn't really get involved with how the churches do stuff outside of that. I think that would probably be the biggest difference, though, is that a pastor can just be moved.
Yeah. It's
Yeah.
kind of like being a school teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah. You have school teacher, principals, assistant principals. Yeah, as bishops too, and a big part of our bishops do, or the bishop within the synod helps with the call process to help churches find and guide the churches in the call process of calling a new pastor to be their pastor. So I do have freedom. Our particular denomination, the LCA, the bishop wouldn't move me without, consulting the church or me or that kind of thing. It's like, hey, he may say, oh, there's a church down the coast that does surf lessons and you'd be perfect there. Do you want to be a part of it? And I was like, ooh, I'm intrigued. Let's have more conversation. Not just like, hey, I think you need to go to Hickory, North Carolina, right, next month. Be like, ooh. So there's a little bit more conversation and a process of me talking to family and congregation, whether I feel called in this place or not. So there's a larger conversation I had, but they help with that process of moving and leading churches to
I think,
find pastoral
yeah.
staff.
I
Yeah.
think that's pretty similar to Church of God of
Yeah.
Prophecy. Yeah, I
It's
don't think
very
they,
rare.
yeah.
The overseer wouldn't just move somebody unless they had to.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me to hear from my brothers and sisters in the pastorate from different denominations that have the oversight of the denominational process. That means that they could get moved, or there could be a reshuffling of the deck and all of that kind of stuff. Because whether it is in the house church scene or in the Sunday morning scene, I mainly hang out with church planters. I am a church planter at heart, and all of that. And at this point, I have been convinced of the virtues of the multiplicity of pastors, like that multiple pastor model. Just accountability, team dynamic, accentuate strengths, the whole nine yards. But that idea of moving a pastor without the, like, in the kind of way, like in the case of the church that I'm at, it is very much a, we believe that this is that this is a good fit. Now the church votes on it, sort of thing. And so to me, not doing it that way seems so odd. Like, there's different structures, it all works, it's fine. Like, that's how that denomination, I'm not taking jabs at different denominations or anything like that. It's just having a governing body that's above the layer of the actual church, to me seems like such a foreign concept to what would make a church, small c, operate most effectively.
Yeah.
I don't know if
Yeah.
that made a lick of sense.
Yeah. I think that might be something that Martin Luther would have agreed with you about a little bit. But ironically, no, what's funny is, so I think what Joe's describing is a lot like how the Baptist churches do too, where they'll kind of vote within themselves to bring a pastor up. And a lot of it's like within their local, even though they are all a part of the SBC, it's confusing. What's interesting though is usually when we're talking about like churches where people just get moved, that's usually more like high liturgical, like the Catholic Church, obviously, just boom, here's the priest, he's going there. We're going to move him around. We're going to make this guy step back. We're going to make him we're going to force him to take a sabbatical. That happens sometimes. Orthodox Church. What's funny to me is like the Methodist Church even has that structure, and you would think that Lutherans would too, because Lutheran is a pretty high liturgical group. But yeah, not so much, it turns out, according to Pastor Will. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I think, part of Luther's theology was this priesthood of all believers, right? It was this hierarchy that the pastor is more spiritual and more Christian than the laity sitting in the pew. We're all baptized children of God who have gifts, and some we're just called to certain roles within. So the accountant who uses their gifts within my congregation is just as spiritual or close to God as, say, I am, who preaches on Sunday. So that is there. I think when it goes back to Wesley, a little bit of history there. I'm not Methodist, but from what I know of it is that Wesley was big on moving the preacher around so the local church doesn't get too attached to the personality of the actual pastor who's preaching. So that they are able to do their work, and then the work of the pastor and preacher is to come in and preach the gospel and equip them. And so that itinerant preacher moving around, the goal of that is so they don't get too attached to one particular person, that they can have a little bit more diversity in who they are and see themselves as apart from the person who is actually the person up front every Sunday. And this notion of people, I think community, even in hierarchy, I have a hard time saying that word, hierarchical institutions of bishops and those with authority and that kind of thing. We give authority to a certain person who's called to a certain thing. But I think also this understanding, the churches have always had this understanding of that it's the people and the voting. Like even the canon of scripture that we have was voted on. Yeah, it was voted by bishops, but there's a group that comes together to make the choices and vote to see, what we consider canon or the true story of gospel and Jesus. So there's always more than just one person. Even when the Pope sits on the seat of authority, is very rare, and it's not without in conversation with what's going on in the entire church and the cardinals that are around them. So this idea of people coming together and setting people apart for specific purposes has been a long tradition of the church.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah. Joe, looked like you wanted to say something.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because, and so I was approached by an AOG church to see if I was interested in throwing my hat in for consideration to interview to be a pastor there, because they were moving the pastor out of that church and into a different church in the Midwest. And I just, I don't, because in in my context, every single role that I've been in pastorally is so intrinsically tied to the group, like to the flock that that I'm caring for. I just, how do you, I that would be my question, right? Like, how do you assess that, like, move from one group to another, but like in that kind of way? Like, I don't know, I would probably think of it differently if I was part of a denomination and all of that kind of stuff. But I think that's part of why it's so important to have strong bylaws and to get into all of the nitty gritty of the boring stuff, the constitutions, the bylaws, all of that kind of stuff. Because it, you in the church planning world, obviously the idea is, like, Will's church is very long in the tooth, right? You guys have been an institution in Chapel Hill for a long time. Um, and so obviously the church existed before you, and the idea is that the church will exist after you. And that's the hope when you plant a church, is that, yeah, you may have been the one of the founding pastors or a pastor along the way, but there's not there's this idea that you want to build it so that way there's longevity past you, you know?
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah.
Amen.
What's interesting is some of this carries into podcasting world too. So for those who know, we've done a few different podcasts, and the whole church doesn't have anything like this at all. We started this, and it kind of was just, I needed to do some kind of ministry, so I started doing some kind of ministry, and then it became, the Josh and TJ show, more or less, but it's about church. But then when we started Systematic Ecology, I started it with the intent that I might not do this forever, but I think it should exist whether I do it or not. So it has a lot more, bylaws, procedures, all that kind of stuff attached to it, even though it's more of a for fun entertainment show than this one is. But yeah, that's because this one is TJ in my ministry. That one, the other one is a bridge between fandoms and the faith, and something that I think legitimately just needs to exist. So we set it up to exist with or without any of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But going back a little bit of the history, like, we're a 77-year-old congregation, and 77 years ago, a group of people said, "Hey, we're near the university. Why don't we gather some Lutheran students together and have a Bible study?" And it just started like that. And then
Yeah.
and then eventually it grows, and then they think about, well, who do we want to be on campus, and where we want to represent, who we want to be a part of, and then a church and a community and a congregation builds around that. And then eventually, as the years go on, history changes, the context may change a little bit, but where we are in our position and our mission of being a Lutheran, having a Lutheran identity, but also close to a university, that kind of is particular to our context. We're part of a larger church, but we also do church this way. So yeah, constitutions and bylaws and core values and mission statements evolve and grow and are tweaked along the way, so that it will outlive the person who came before you and has a larger vision to move forward in the world. And I think, I think that's the canon of scriptures, like that. How we do, all that is to outlive the council of the Nicene Creed, outlive the Council of Nicaea.
Oh yeah.
But they set some things out to move forward.
Yeah. One more quick note before TJ jumps into the meat of this episode. I'm told that I don't often enough bring up my own resume. So since you mentioned AOG, I actually was part of the AOG for a while. And one
What
thing
does
I
AOG
did
mean?
for
What is
Assemblies
AOG?
of God. So
Okay.
Assemblies of God, yeah. So 3 or 4 years, I forget. I think it was 3 years. I was part of the Assemblies of God, and I actually went from church to church, starting up children's ministries. So I was like a children's church planner kind of deal within churches. It was kind of fun. It was a fun gig. Had a lot of good times.
No.
Yeah, just fun fact. That's all.
That was before Josh's dark age.
Yes. Yeah. It was
When he
before
died.
Endgame, and now we're in like phase 4, and everyone's like, what are you doing, dude?
Yeah.
There's no continuity.
So that's more true than you think. So I am going to ask everyone how your church handles 5 different areas of polity. If you need to take a nap, ring the bell, and we'll get back to you. You are each going to tell me how your church handles it and how you wish it would handle it if there's something you'd want to change. So, who's ready? Hopefully, Will. How does your
Yeah,
church
fire
handle
away.
questions of where funds will be sent or used?
Our church council is the ultimate decider of that, but of course that they listen to ministry teams and committees within the church, and they lobby, I guess is a bad word to use, but like lobby where we think certain ministry teams should have the money and then where it should be sent to. So people give their offerings to the church, and then we use that as a congregation to do the ministry we're called to do. So yeah, church council, and then are connected to the synod. We send some to the synod as well, the North Carolina synod, and then they use that money in the same way. They have their own governing body, synod council that decides where that goes. And if I could do it different, I don't know how else to do it differently other than, we have the money that we have, we don't have the money we don't have. And then, the church comes together and decides how they want to spend it in different committees and church council and congregational meetings. We just had our annual congregational meeting this past Sunday, and we passed a budget for 2024, and a lot of work led up to present that to the congregation. Some people asked a few questions of why this, why that, and then those were answered, and then we voted approved, and we have a ministry plan and budget for 2024.
Pretty sweet. Joe, how does your church handle questions of funding?
So, the one of the pastors on the team is essentially the executive pastor, more or less. He's the guy that handles like budgetary things, different things like that. When there's a matter of addressing the budget, the plan, all of that kind of stuff, we'll do what we call a family meeting. We do it a little bit differently than than some churches. It's not so much of a membership specific meeting. There are some people there that are members. However, we say that if you call the church your home and this is the place that you choose to worship, then please show up, because not everybody is comfortable with associating the title of member, even though they're longtime attenders, they care deeply about the church, all of those kinds of things. And so, bring it forward. Generally, Jer will be the guy that will answer those questions, but it is kind of a roundtable environment among the entire pastoral team. And then it gets voted upon, kind of like what Will was saying. Open it up for dialogue, and then afterwards voted upon, and that becomes it.
I like the idea of family meeting. Church council sounds so formal, blah, 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 but yet we're a family. We're brothers, sisters in Christ. But yeah, not all family meetings go super smooth if you have some important things to discuss and you have different opinions. So, families can be dysfunctional. Families can have toxicity. Families can do this. But yeah, it's basically, we're a family coming together, making decisions that affect the entire family, even those who aren't in the actual meeting itself. So
real quick on that note, everybody on this roundtable will appreciate how ironic all of this is, and for all of you guys who have heard me before, you hopefully will appreciate the irony in all of this. I linked arms with these guys like 2 months before they entered into the process of buying a new church property and preparing the new church property and all of that, which launched at the end of the summer. So I've officially walked a Sunday morning model through starting a new location and all of that kind of stuff. So I know firsthand that some of those family meetings centered around major church changing situations can get weird. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was a
Real exciting.
fascinating experience launching a new location for that, and me being me with all of my temperaments and all of my mindsets and my opinions and all of that kind of stuff. To be a part of that process was wild, to say the least.
Yeah, we can only imagine. So, Josh, how does your church handle where funds get sent or used?
Whatever Will said will also be true of where I'm going.
Sweet,
You just copy paste for all my answers. It's fine.
sweet. You want to answer the Pentecostal part?
I mean, yeah. Um, I I think basically it's weird. My understanding is it's the state for each part of the COGOP, like the state overseer, the state of South Carolina Church of God of Prophecy has its own funds, and they can choose to do a church plant, or someone else could do a plant and basically apply for that to be a Church of God of Prophecy church. And as far as like the funding go, like the churches themselves handle all of it, except for I think each church sends 10% to the state, more or less.
Yeah, that's pretty much
And I
right.
don't know what the state does with it, but I do know they save a lot of money. They have a decent savings account. I don't know how much,
Yeah,
but I
allegedly.
know that they're conservative in how they spend. I know that.
Yeah. So we have a biannual meeting that is every other year, not twice a year. Is that the right phrase? Who cares? It is now. I say it is. There's a meeting every other year for the entire state to discuss things like budget. Usually me and the coolest dude I could find in the room skip the budget meeting. Last time we went to see Toy Story 3, 4. Last time we went to see Toy Story 4. It's pretty cool. But the churches do report to the state. Within each church, it's handled a little differently. At mine, it's just more or less the oldest members, as long as tenured, not literally oldest, mostly. Just kind of get a say in how the church spends its money. And they vote on what they think is best.
Yeah. My parents' church have like a associate pastor who comes up with a plan and then they vote on it quarterly. Yeah. 4 times a year.
Yeah. So, Will, how do questions of how to upkeep and use facilities, how are those handled within your church?
Yeah, we have a facility use policy that guides our church council in making decisions whether we allow an outside group to use our building and how to use our building within the church. And so basically the policy kind of helps us govern and think through if a non-for-profit or for-profit organization wants to use our building, is it in line with our core values and mission as a congregation? And if we feel like it is, then we say, yep, cool. We vote as church council. Yep, they can use it. Like for instance, we have a women's chorus that uses our building on Monday nights, and they're like a 70-person strong choir, and they do community service and they practice here and they go out and do concerts, and we're like, yep, you can use it. We've had other people come want to use our building for like a cooking class, for-profit cooking class, and even though we have the facilities for it, we're like, it we're glad that you're teaching a class, but what you're doing and teaching isn't like necessarily ministry or for or against what we, our core values, but we think, no, you probably should use a commercial kitchen or something else other than just our church. Now, if it was someone inside the church who was going to use it as a ministry or extension of what they're doing in the world, then yeah. But so yeah, we have facility use policy, about 10 pages, that hopefully checks all the boxes and allows people to see how to open up the building, close the building, and then the church council. It goes before church council each month if there's a request to see whether someone within or outside the church uses our building, how it's used.
Cool. Joe, how about you guys? Do you have an facilities upkeep policy or?
So we have there's a ministry within the church of folks that volunteer to upkeep the facilities. Ever since starting the new location, that's really when it kind of became more of there became more of an opportunity to be able to utilize more space and like for allow for the space to be more dynamic. So it's actually something that we are currently thinking through on how we can go about best allowing the space to not just sit throughout the week and all of that, and be able to offer it up to folks who would be engaging in ministry and different things like that. Right now, any questions of could this be used or anything like that right now go through the pastoral team, and we discuss it and kind of evaluate it, like kind of like what Will was saying, evaluate it against like mission, vision, values, all of those kinds of things. But there's certainly not a, what did you say, Will? 10-page document? That's got to be a riveting piece of literature.
Yeah, I'll tell you, man. You want to fall asleep at night? We got some good documents and policies around here you can read before you go to bed.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Funny enough, my church specifically also has like the 10-page document on this is how we should treat
What?
the church. Yeah, it's wild.
Interesting.
Well, there you go.
I'm gonna keep answering for my parents' church because I attended there for a long time, so I know a lot about it. They didn't have that kind of thing. They had as far as like upkeep goes, they had some volunteers, and then they actually would hire some people from the community or within the church that they knew needed work. So like they have a guy who does like all the lawn stuff who couldn't otherwise find work, so they pay him to do all their lawn stuff, you know. But as far as like use goes, you basically, the associate pastor and senior pastor text each other, and if they both think it's cool, that's it. That's the story. You know,
Yeah.
they've
More or
let me
less.
do parties there before. They've let me use tables for our Friendsgiving, and they're just kind of like, yeah, hey, do we need an extra table? No, we only need 3 this week. Cool. Yeah, Josh can use the table. That's it.
Yeah,
you know?
I mean, there's some flexibility with us too. I think like the church and church council and the membership, trust me that if like someone calls me on a Thursday and say, hey, we need to use a room for blah 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 blah, can we like absolutely come and use our building for what you need? But if it was an outside group that's for profit or not for profit for an
that
ongoing
makes
use
sense.
throughout the year, then we vote on whether that. But in terms of a member will call me and say, hey, I need a stack of chairs because we're doing a party this weekend. We can borrow. Like, sure, just bring them back, before Sunday or something. So there's some of that stuff that's going on.
Yeah, everyone's real chill about the building.
Mhm.
So, questions of doctrine and theology. Briefly, if possible. Will, how does the LCA handle questions of doctrine and theology?
Yeah, we're already apart and linked in with doctrines and theology in terms of scriptures, the Scripture, Bible, Lutheran confessions, and the creeds. And so that's kind of the binding, governing theological principles and doctrine that we're bound to. Of course, there's freedom and a little bit of flexibility in terms of interpretation of what those passages are and how you read that, interpret that, and how you live that out in the world. But those are the binding theological documents or dogma that governs who we are, and that's in our Constitution. And so we say in our Constitution our beliefs: Scripture, Lutheran confessions, the universal creeds of Nicene, Athanasian, and Apostles' Creed. And then and everything else that is interpreted. So we're bound by that, which also bound by the Synod and also the ELCA. If we were going to change a doctrine, if our church said, yep, we no longer think the Gospel of Luke should be a part of Scripture, and we're going to take it out,
What a take.
yeah, like the week before Christmas, we're like, yeah, we don't like shepherds, we're getting out of here. Then I probably what would happen is our bishop would say, like, oh wait, I got word of this, and the the Synod Council would get involved in discipline or whatever, and they would ask, then why are you still Lutheran? Then why are you still connected with this? Shouldn't you be something else and join somebody else or be independent? And then you go through that process of dismembership of being a part of a denomination. But so there's governance for us as a local church, Synod, ELCA, pan Lutheran across the world. But yeah, if we wanted to change something, it would go through the steps, and then eventually would ask them why you're Lutheran. Why are you still part of it?
How specific is any of that? Like, is there anything that's like you have to interpret Psalm 26 literally? Like, do they have like this is how you should interpret this, or is it a little less specific than that?
It's less specific than that. But now there's social issues and things like, ordination of men and women, or same-sex marriage, those kinds of things that have gone down the line over the last 20 years that have, open for interpretation, debate within the church, that, the bylaws of visions and expectations of how pastors and churches are to do and lead the sacraments and the rites of the church, that in terms of social issues, sexuality, gender, those things have been the hot buttons over the last 20 years, where there have been breaks within the denomination to say, nope, we don't believe what the ELCA is saying about this in terms of its social statement, so we're going to form our own denomination or go independent. And so those are the things that have been breakaways or discipline on over the last 20 years or so or more. So yeah, there's a process within that. And then of course, if a Lutheran church in the Synod was like, we interpret this passage to be this, and you kind of peer review, you're under peer review of other Lutheran congregations within your Synod and within the whole ELCA, whether you're an outsider, whether you're insider, whether that's mainstream or not, or you're either being cutting edge or edgy, just to be cutting edge and edgy. But yeah, Joe, you had a question around that?
I don't know if I necessarily had a question. I was more just mulling through what you had said, and I think that's interesting. What the denomination would choose to be, I guess, hardlined, for lack of a better phrase, on, as far as being on a united front. I mean, it's not like shocking, like I'm not stunned or anything like that, but just I think it's interesting when you consider what all is available to like be closed-handed on. That just that to me seems like interesting lines to draw.
Yeah, I mean the big to talk about a short answer on doctrine and theology, but in terms of who we understand Jesus to be, who we understand God to be as Father, Son, Holy Spirit, the Trinity, the creeds. But yeah, you get nuanced with Job or the Psalm, and we interpret this way, or we're going to say, oh, this changes how we see people or ministry. I mean, those are kind of loose interpretation within the congregation itself and context. And yeah, there's more conservative ELCA Lutheran churches and how they vote politically, socially in Hickory, North Carolina, upstate, rather than over and against, say, who we are in terms of a university town next to a liberal university. So there's some wiggle room in there. So they were like, we think you're heretics when it comes to that. But then it was like, well, we still confess the Apostles' Creed together. We still understand and believe in the canon of Scripture. Yeah, we do like shepherds and Christmas. So we're going to celebrate this go around. So there's some stuff with that. But in terms of who you vote for, or social policy, or whether Black Lives Matter or not, or whether homosexuality or whatever, all those things get nuanced when you get in the congregation, different parts of the state. But yeah, we're governed. We have in our Constitution what we believe, and if we wanted to change that, then I think there would be discipline within the Synod and the ELCA that'd be like, then why are you still Lutheran or part of a denomination?
But if it's nothing that, and I'm honestly curious, because for so long I just threw stones and didn't ask questions. So now that I've grown up a little bit, I'm just fascinated.
Sure.
So if it's not anything that would directly conflict with, like, I'll call them Lutheran values, not necessarily like Christian values, but Lutheran specific values. Would you still have to go up the pecking order, so to speak, to make those alterations and changes? if there was something within the bylaws. I can't necessarily point to a
Yeah.
specific example of what this would look like, but I'm saying, like, if it's not anything that would necessarily ruffle the feathers of the powers that be, is that still something that you've got to run up the flagpole, or is that handled locally?
It's handled locally in the congregation. If I gave a stewardship sermon and, I have a certain hot take on how we should give or not give in the church, the bishop's not like looking over my shoulder or anything. But if I started preaching like prosperity gospel, that if you give to this congregation, then God's going to bless us, and God's going to smite you, or a non-grace filled understanding of how to do stewardship in the congregation, and it got wind and went viral on YouTube, then my bishop might say, "Hey, Will, let's have a conversation. What's going on over there?" But in terms of minor things of how we do ministry, there's some freedom there and flexibility to be able to express the gospel in our present day context under what we believe in terms of the Bible, who God is, the creeds, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Anytime they bring up light beer, a little red light goes off in the archbishop's office.
Yeah,
and then
there's a wide tap.
Germany,
There's a
sir.
lot of taps, and even though there's some that might as well just be water, we say, like, to each their own.
Yeah,
that's glad to hear. Josh, do you feel like doing the Pentecostal doctrine and theology?
I feel like they are actually pretty strict about that. They're just not very tech savvy. So they don't know how to check if you're listening, if you're teaching what they want you to teach, but they are pretty specific. I actually have a 5-book set of that includes exactly how I'm supposed to interpret the Bible, what version of the Bible they like the most, or disfavor, which they don't tell you have to use a certain version, but they're like, yeah, we really disfavor this version.
That's intense.
A history of their church, a history of the capital C church. I'm trying to think what the 5th one was, but yeah, they got like a whole book set that you have to take tests on before you can be ordained, and you have to be ordained through your local church. Then you have to meet like a local council of pastors from various different local churches who kind of come together and interview / interrogate / quiz you to see whether or not they think you're up to muster, more or less.
It's so funny to me, the misconceptions that circle around this thing, because you would think when you hear Lutheran and you hear high church and all of those kinds of things, like, strike that, reverse it. Like, that Josh's answer should absolutely be Will's answer. That like there's all of these strict guidelines and all of that kind of stuff. That's so fascinating. You wouldn't think, because of all of the things that you hear about Pentecostals and all of that kind of stuff, like, oh, they don't care. They're not that strict.
No.
Yeah, we do care. We just
questionable.
We like to yell and dance during church.
Yeah.
So
it's questionable whether or not you can be a Pentecostal preacher and disagree about speaking of tongues being the evidence of being in the Holy Spirit. You might be able to disagree about that, maybe. But if you straight up say some stuff like not everyone can speak in tongues or anything like that, you can get in trouble. And if the LGBT stuff or a lot of the stuff that Will listed off, that they're like, you can be really conservative or really liberal, no, that's not a thing. You can't do that. You get too progressive there, they might let you keep the building. They're not gonna let you stay co-god.
Yep. So they've gotten a lot less strict. Women can wear pants and jewelry.
I'm allowed to have a wedding band. I remember I was alive when they allowed wedding bands, and so many people were so excited.
Yeah,
it's crazy.
Pretty cool.
Yeah.
I've never ceased to be amazed
modernizing
by
at
denominationalism.
an incredible rate. So how do y'all's churches handle questions of groups, businesses, other churches that you can work with? And I feel like it's just voting, right?
Yeah, I would say it's similar to like our buildings use, like who we're working with or partnering with. I don't know. I mean, I think there's some freedom there too. Like if it doesn't have to go by church council vote. If I wanted to work with St. Paul AME Zion Church down the road, we enter conversation and things. I mean, working with, partnering with, I think is, part of our discernment, my discernment, ministry team discernment. Now, if we were going to do a joint project and have our name on the same side of a building or something with a church that's way different than us or the Mormon church or whatever, I don't know. I guess we'd have to think through like what are we, who we working with. But the same way would be like if we're working with a civic group or a non-religious group or atheist group. I don't know. That's a good question, but it's similar to the building use. Like does it match up with our core values? Do we feel like this is beneficial or represent the gospel? Can we still be ourselves and still be in partnership with this other organization or group or denomination? There's some conversation goes around with that on the micro and macro level. I think there's conversations around, does that match up with us, that we want to partner and spend time doing this? But there's not necessarily big like micromanaging with who we do ministry with. And I don't think our synod or ELCA does as well. Now, there's that big stink back in 9/11 when the Missouri Synod Church was at a multi-faith or not just multi-denominational, multi-faith prayer service up in New York. And that particular Missouri Synod Lutheran Church pastor, that denomination tends to be more conservative, was called out. And there's a big stink about why are you partnering up with people who aren't Christian at a prayer service? And you're like, whoa, wow, it doesn't mean he's confessing Jesus isn't Lord by standing beside people who are a different religion than you. But Missouri Synod got really uptight about that. And so it's different from the ELCA, but there's some things out there that occurs that question, should we partner or not when it comes to that stuff? So
I think for us, you can give a very similar answer to the last three, including this one. So like facilities, doctrine, theology, and what groups you or businesses, where for the self-governed independent church, it is you're part of why the structure doesn't always hold up is because there isn't anybody outside of the church looking in, and so it's requisite on you to build a strong enough foundation that can hold within the paradigm of your own organization. And that's why it is so important to have a strong set of values. Yes, personally, as pastors, as leaders, all of those kinds of things, but actual written out value statements of the church that you can fall back on when you're like, okay, what about, so like with the doctrine theology, a lot of that stuff can be found in our in what's written and all of that, but then it kind of goes to leadership right directly afterwards, and all of that. This business one is kind of funny because I'm the squeaky wheel on our pastoral team as far as this goes. Who's shocked? Because because I think a lot of smaller churches would do well to separate out their operating budget from the tithe. I know that's a whole other conversation and all that kind of stuff, so I won't get super into it. But working with different businesses, different organizations, even if they're not explicitly Christian, could be beneficial for a church and still align with mission, vision, and all of that kind of stuff to help generate money for the church that can be used for ministry, outreach, community, all of those kinds of things. And you can piggyback off of for-profit businesses that have deeper pockets than most churches do most of the time, depending, and be able to piggyback off of that to be able to generate more of an impact in your community or what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And the next roundtable topic is brought to you by Joe. No, I like the tithing topic, because we need to do, should people tithe? Should pastors tithe? Should churches tithe? And what do we do with the tithes? Yeah, fun stuff. TJ, if you were going to ask me the same question, I actually did want to bring up, even though they're really strict within the denomination, Church Got a Prophecy, in my experience, there's like hard lines. You kind of got to believe certain ways. They are pretty loose when it comes to like who you work with and how you plan all that out. I know in Charleston, when I lived in Somerville, they had a a group that was actually started from one of the pastors at our church that worked with Catholic churches there, Anglican churches, all kinds of stuff. And I was really impressed by that even though they have a pretty rigid, here's what we believe structure, they still had a pretty loose, how do we work with capital C church structure? And I really liked that about the denomination,
Yeah.
actually.
Yeah, it's one of the nice things. They can believe what they want, but we believe this, only this.
Yeah, y'all can believe what you want. We're just going to disagree with you nicely, but we're going to disagree with you.
Right.
Yeah. So how does the ELCA handle membership and excommunication, perhaps?
Yeah. So I think theologically, doctrine, spiritual level, you're a member of the church, capital C, when you're baptized into Christ. And so that's where we say membership. But in terms of membership of Holy Trinity, we have a process that we have a new member class that people go through. And then when they're done, they decide if they want to join the church, and they got up in front of the church and they confess the creed and say that we want to be part of this church and we agree with what Holy Trinity does and its mission statement and its constitution. Then they just join the church, and we put them on our rolls. Now our church council will approve that list, not as a means by saying we approve of their salvation or not, but say, yes, we accept you and vote and say you're an official member of this church, so that if something happened, we need to expel or take someone off the roster because they are breaking a boundary or creating dissent or not a healthy person in our community of faith. And then we could say, we vote you to no longer be a voting member of the church. Because once you're a member, you get to vote on things like the budget and who the next pastor is going to be, and staff people coming on board, or how to use the building. So you have voting rights as a member. And if there's a particular person who is unhealthy or just not in line with the mission and value of the church, then church council has the authority to say you're no longer a part of this community of faith. We're not saying you're no longer a Christian or Jesus doesn't love you or that you won't go to heaven one day, but to be a part of this community of faith, you have to abide by these standards. So that's who we are. And that's self-governed as our congregation. The bishop couldn't come in and say, you need to take this person off your roster. Oh, sorry. Light went off. The bishop couldn't come in and say, oh, well, I don't like what that person in your congregation said on my Facebook chat, and so we're going to kick them out. We're going to be like, no, sorry, they're a part of our community. That's part of our governance. So it's very rare there's excommunication, but that's built in a sense that, I've had pastor friends of mine who have used that as to withhold the sacraments from someone until they repented of something or maybe they were abusing a wife or a family member or something, and they were like, no, we will not commune you until you repent of your actions or change your actions or get help or whatever. That to me is a very big gray area. I don't know if I could do that in terms of withholding the sacrament from people. And that's what basically excommunication is. You're withholding membership in the sacraments from people, or at least the long tradition of the Catholic Orthodox Church, from what I understand. I could be wrong, but so there have been pastor friends of mine who've exercised that authority. Church council have as a means to repentance. Whether that's a good tool or not is up for debate. So if there was someone in our congregation who was really being disruptive and was not abiding by the boundaries that we set forth on healthy relationships, then we'd have to take it like what we read at the beginning of this passage, Matthew, go to that person first, then bring someone else to talk to, and then you take it to the governing council as a whole in the congregation.
I feel as though it should be said that this is probably different than someone actively harassing members of the church or something like that, in which case it might not be excommunication, but you might still get like a civil lawsuit or something, or a restraining order against somebody. Like that's different than what we're talking about. I think that's a different topic, right? Okay.
Oh yeah, cool. For sure. So unfortunately, there is a little bit of rawness to this particular topic for me and for the church that I'm at. as far as the membership side, I kind of addressed that before when we had talked about the family meeting and voting and all of that kind of stuff. There is a membership process. There's a like just a short document. You fill it out. And then you meet with the pastors, and all of that. It's not that it's not a there's not a huge, like a highly organized structure to the membership side, because the thesis statement for us is that family dynamic, that community dynamic, and all of that kind of stuff. And so that's why there is this idea of, if you call the Grove your home church, then
Hmm.
you engage with this process and all of that kind of stuff. It also for us is part of, it's kind of built into the area that we're from. This is an area that's very highly dominated by Roman Catholicism and buffet churches that are just kind of churn and burn members and all of that kind of stuff. And so a lot of folks in this area have a history of church hurt. That's very, very prevalent in this area. And so if we were to put hardline membership requirements, labels, so on and so forth, like you may find as standard practice in some churches, that would be a stumbling block for some folks, and all of that kind of stuff. You don't Membership does not afford you anything special at the Grove subsequently because of that. You don't get like anything like that. As far as excommunication or anything like that, it is 110% rooted in Matthew. It is if somebody is creating division, we approach them, have a conversation in the spirit of restoration, in the spirit of restoring them to the body, not like the idea is that you give every affordance to try and restore that individual until they have elected to actively disengage and actively reject those advances and all of those kinds of things. And then if the person will not take steps to make the situation right and be able to take the steps to engage in healthy behavior for themselves and for the body, then the unfortunate decision has to be made to say, look, this might not be the right spot for you to worship in.
Yeah, and I'll say there's a gradient. We know that, like Joe and I are alluding to, is it's not something that's taken lightly. It's something we grieve. It's something we take it important. It's for the overall well-being of the community and the person. It's not like, oh, we're lording and judging you and kicking you out because we don't like the clothes you wear. It's like, man, there's some deep stuff that's going on here. And I will also share that our church practices an open table and participation within the life of the community of faith. So anybody who shows up on a Sunday does not have to be a member to have communion, doesn't have to be a member to participate in Bible study or the Christmas play that we're having on Sunday, all those things. The only thing that afford membership that benefits, you would say, is a deeper part of the decision-making process of the congregation. So I'll do a new member class in January, and everyone that's a part of that has probably been active in our church, worshiping and participating in different ministries for a few months, or if not a whole season. Mm-hmm. But what I'm inviting them into is to say, hey, be an official member here during our congregational meeting, or if I'm making decisions about the budget, about our next pastor, about what we do in the community. You have a voice and vote with that decision making process.
Yeah, the membership where I got mine, which is funny. Actually, I'm still technically a member because I haven't changed my membership to Lutheran Church yet because I'm lazy. Um, I'll be honest with you guys. But it went, you had some documents you had to read and kind of understand what the church believes as far as like how to read the Bible, what they think about the Bible, what they believe about the Trinity, and what they believe about the gifts of the Spirit, not just speaking in tongues, but healing, prophecy, all of that kind of stuff. You would read that. You would sign something that kind of says, I agree to uphold these beliefs. The pastor would take you up front if they affirm you in front of the congregation, and an active member could say, I want this person to be a member. I forget what exactly the wording, but one person would kind of propose to make you a member, and then somebody else would second it, and then they would do the whole congregation can aye or no. Everybody has the option to say no for some reason. I've never heard it, but the whole congregation, we don't want that guy. I guess you wouldn't be a member.
Yeah.
But I've never heard that. So that's kind of what the membership process is like. I have no idea what it's like to remove. I've never seen it done in COGAP.
Yeah, I haven't either, but we that's why church council, is very rare. But yeah, I mean, I think each church in the Lutheran Church has their own way of accepting new members, where they make them go through a 2-month catechism, or whether I do just 3 classes. I do a class where we get to know one another. So, who are you? And then we do a what we believe class and talk about the Bible and basic Lutheran beliefs. And then the third class is who is Holy Trinity and kind of our history and what we're about. And after that class, that they're like, hey, we want to go deeper in this congregation and be an official member, then yeah. And then some of those membership numbers are really just kind of people flexing numbers and how many people you have. And sometimes you can also get a contest of who has the most members.
That's
numbers
definitely
game,
a toxic thing that happens.
Yeah. Not
within
cool
denomination for pastors are kind of anyway.
Exactly.
That's a different topic as well. But as far as what it does, I think membership is basically the same as like wills. You get a little bit more say in some decisions. I get put on an email list, so I know everything that church does, even though I no longer attend. Yeah.
You get access to the sacred email list.
Yeah,
and
you also agree to pay your
which
tithe.
is actually helpful because usually I don't know what's going on with the weather until I get a text from Church of God of Prophecy in Rock Hill that says, hey, we're closed due to icing later. I'm like, oh, it's going to ice. Cool.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, my church actually has a very few members because our membership kind of test is beating me in a ping pong game. So
there are no members.
It's my fault.
Phenomenal.
Yeah. So it's up to the church, really. So one thing, we like to do here is our roundtable roundup. I'm going to read out 4 questions. Everyone will know what they are. One at a time, I'm going to pick you. You answer one of the questions. You must repeat the question you're answering, and no one can respond or ask any follow-ups until after the roundup is over. So you can answer the same question as someone else if you want, because we didn't say you can't, but it would be cooler if you didn't. So I'm just going to read them all, and then I'm going to start calling on people. How can churches evaluate themselves to see where they might need to guard themselves better? How might our views on Big C and Little C church polity differ? How can self-governing churches hold themselves accountable if they have no tradition or authority to answer to? And how should our church polity be responsible to our greater culture's polity? Should churches handle their own issues, report failures to authorities outside the church, completely avoid our nation's politics and legal systems altogether, etc., things like that? Yeah. So, Joe, which question would you like to answer?
I feel like there's one that it makes sense for me to answer, but one that I would like to answer. So I'm going to go with the one that I would like to answer and say, how might our views on Big C and Little C church polity differ? I think that by and large, even with there being room for different layers or different titles or what have you, that one kind of flows as an extension of the other, because we've been given this modus operandi for how to handle relationships with one another in the large sense. We've been given the mode of being in order to be fully functioning citizens of the kingdom of God. And so essentially what you're doing is taking organizational standards that are based on those standards for how to be a fully functioning citizen of the kingdom of God and applying them in a way that allows for your small subsect of the larger church to be able to operate well and to be able to operate efficiently and different things like that. And even for the things that are a little bit more circumstantial, a little bit more situational, you can still derive values for handling those things from the teachings of Jesus. And I think part of where, like, to go back to something that Will and I both were kind of tap dancing around, that there's a significant weight to handling some of these topics, and that these things that we do, good, bad, and indifferent, um they are a holy responsibility. And all of that, being a part of the pastoral team, we part of where that goes awry, and we see that not really done well, I think, is when we start to deviate from those teachings of Jesus, those church principles in the large scale sense, for in favor of how we think it should be done, our own self-interests, different things like that. So I really think one should just be a reflection and extension of the other.
All right. Will.
Yeah, I'm going to take how can self-governing churches hold themselves accountable if they have no tradition or authority to answer to? Because I would say that question is wrong, because every community has a tradition and an authority to answer to, no matter who you are, whether you're a mission plant or 2 weeks old or 100 years old. You have some embedded tradition or authority within you, whether it's scripture, whether it's people you're gathering with. Everyone brings to the table a certain amount of tradition. So I think, how can they hold themselves accountable? Well, yeah, I think every body, every group of people or body of people, organization or community has within it some sort of peer review, whether it's a large scientific peer review on how physics work, or whether it's the canon of scripture, or how we got to the Nicene or Apostles' Creed. There's a peer review process, and that happens within groups as well. So whether they're a small mission church or houseplant church, or whether a church's been downtown for 200 years, they all have a tradition. So, and they will be held accountable, whether they're just autonomous unto themselves or not.
Cool. Well answered. Bravo. From the independent church, bravo.
Josh, are you going to answer a question for us?
Well, unsurprisingly to everyone, I'm going to do that last one. How should our church polity be responsible to our greater culture's polity? I think fully. I think actually I'm disgusted and appalled by how many churches attempt to not be transparent, to withhold information. I know a church who has someone on their youth staff who was not technically convicted of stuff with a minor, and it's like, not technically convicted isn't good enough unless you're telling every single mom and dad that comes in, hey, this guy was tried, here's the case. That's not okay. The sexual assault and stuff that kind of gets wrapped up and we want to hold it from the government and hand it within ourselves. No, you report every single thing that's happened. I even think churches should pay taxes personally, but that's just me. I think our mission isn't to be outside of the culture, lording over it because we're holier than thou and that we're better than you, so we can handle these things better. I think our mission is to be light within the culture, figure out how to work with the government, and do the best that we can. Actually, my favorite thing my parents have ever done, I think, they did a mission at a detention center down in Tallahassee that they helped do a ministry there. And the first thing that they were told is, don't do this if you're not going to stick with it. They actually talked to the people who run the detention center, because so many ministries come, they help for a little bit, and they leave. And these kids need someone who's going to stick around. They don't need someone who's just going to leave. It's actually more harmful than just doing nothing for them at all. And I think it was really important that they took the time to talk to the state, to talk to the people who are actually doing these things and understand the concept better. Because from my perspective, if I didn't know any of that, I probably would think, yeah, it's great. I'm going to go spend time with someone who doesn't get to spend time with a lot of people. And I might not have thought of the psychological damage. And that's why I think it's important to work with the state, work with the culture, work with these companies that are doing these things who maybe understand it a little bit better than you, so that when you do help, you're actually helping. And also not allowing abuse and stuff to go hidden under the rug, because I promise you, legally, you cannot punish it anywhere near as much as it should be punished. Let the courts do it.
Yeah.
Boom.
All right. So does anyone have anything to add, or that they would like
Wait,
to
what about
respond?
you?
Hey, it's in the question. All the questions might not get answered.
Yeah, but aren't you going to answer one?
Fine. So how can churches evaluate themselves to see where they might need to guard themselves better? I think, unfortunately, this is usually kind of something that has to happen in hindsight, because it's very difficult to be aware of a weakness until it has been exposed. One of the ways you can attempt it, though, is by kind of sitting down maybe once a quarter, once a year, reading through. If you can hear the train in the background, don't worry about it. It's not going to hit me, probably. It's just that time of night. But you can sit down and review your church's polity in its entirety, which is exhausting, but sometimes necessary to make sure you're not gonna get played.
So
Not yet.
I won't looking at the time. I won't go into it. But I would just say, TJ, I would challenge you to revisit your statement on you can't really see a weakness until it's already been exposed. I would challenge
Yeah.
you to think through that
That's
statement
why I said the
and
second
whether.
thing.
Yeah, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I do see where you're coming from, though, and that's where I would deposit, since this is the part where we're all responding after the roundup. Sorry, I did that for you, DJ. I apologize. But yeah, my response to the TJ thing would be to add on that's why it's important to know your church history, so you can actually read and know the mistakes before you make them yourselves, because someone else probably already made the mistake you're about to make.
Yeah,
Just,
and that goes with
read a little
history
bit.
in general, the history of the church,
Yeah.
history of America, my own history. How do we reevaluate those things? I like the idea of like undercover boss in church, like have like a plant every now and then, not as nefarious to see, but like there are people who, like Christian, when he came to our conference and he was going to visit our church, I said, hey, I'm not going to like introduce you to folks. I just want you to walk in and see what you see. And are we clear on our announcements? Was my congregation warm and welcoming? Did you know where to go, what to be on your own? Like, and afterwards, I want a report card on like how our church greeted you. Were they too weird and too overzealous, or were they, or did they ignore you? Like, there's a happy medium there. So all that stuff. So Christian, came to me afterward and said, hey, this is what I experienced. This was cool. This was a little confusing to me. I've never been to your church or a Lutheran church with that kind of bulletin, or where to go for communion. Like, so some of those things, he helped me with that. So an idea of getting a friend to visit your church, or having someone visit your church, and then, just don't tell anybody and see what their experience is, and give you some feedback on how you do community together, I think is a good way to go about that.
Yeah. And my response to Will's answer is he still didn't answer the question. I get what he's saying. Like, yeah, technically you're right. But also, I do think there's some issue if you're not recognizing any of these traditions and stuff as authoritative. You might recognize that you have them, but I still think if you're not recognizing any of it as authoritative, then you have this too much wiggle room, in my opinion, where maybe you still make some mistakes because you're like, oh, well, that's, we recognize what Luther said, but we don't believe everything he said. So we're going to ignore this over here. We're going to ignore this over here. Like, I feel like you can do cherry picking if you don't recognize anything, which is where I think the best way to stay self-aware is to have a really well-written polity where you are deciding beforehand, as opposed to just going along with it as it comes up.
So, let me ask you guys, do you want to go down this rabbit hole? Should I just keep my mouth shut?
I'm curious what the problem is.
That literally any denomination, anywhere, anytime can do exactly what you're talking about. That's not a matter of self-governing or anything else like that, because we've watched churches across denominations. I'm not even going to bother naming any out. You don't need to. That will cherry pick different aspects of things, but do so in a way that flies within their context. So adding the context can help.
Mhm.
It's possible that it can provide some guidelines, but to say what Will said is incorrect coming from that world. No, like I Josh, I got to tell you, the high liturgical pastor hit that answer dead on 110%, because
So
you can have those things. You can have all of you can have a rock solid polity in place and have all of the systems in place. And I'm coming from a context that I've gotten on the guys about some of this stuff being a little loose. So like I get it. Like I understand that there is danger that can lurk when you don't have good systems and structures and all of that kind of stuff in place. But to say that that opens the door for cherry picking is kind of picking on one specific group in when the things that you're talking about are literally prevalent everywhere.
yeah, I think no matter what your laws are, you can manipulate them. You just got to know how to do it. I agree with you. Also, I never said Will was incorrect. I just said he didn't answer the question, which he didn't. He just got around the question.
Oh, I mean that's what I was saying. So maybe I misworded what I had said, but as far as whether or not it was right or wrong, you're correct. I didn't necessarily mean whether or
But I
not
agree
it
with
was right
everything
or
you said
wrong,
also.
but
I think that's a good response.
he answered the question like bang on. Like that's because that's what, like, as long as you're like, we could all hit the brakes on all of this stuff and be like, whoa, Will, you're talking about all of this structure. Well, what if this and what if that and what if this? Oh, TJ, your denomination has all of these strict guidelines for this, that, and the other thing. Well, what about this? What about that? Like, you can do all of that for literally any tradition. So if you're taking it at face value and saying, well, okay, if a church is utilizing these things as a tradition, well, then yeah, they might not have a denominational tradition that they answer to, but they certainly have a scriptural and biblical tradition that they answer to. So that's where I would double back and say, yes, my verbiage was incorrect, but I can say I like, again, coming from that world, I think that's exactly the right answer.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
like,
No,
I like what he
it-
said. I just wanted to go down that a little bit of how do you do it differently? Because you still have to do something. You can't just say, well, we have a tradition, we don't need anything written down. Or, technically there are these other things we can pull from, we don't need to write it down. I
Definitely.
still think you need to write stuff down. I just
And I think
that I agree with
Constitution and
wholeheartedly.
policies are you're definitely what ifing. Like, you trying to anticipate the what if this happens, what if that. I mean, look at the rule book for PGA
Marvel
golf.
needs to
Like, it's
write
the
our
thickest thing,
policies.
because they're always anticipating what if. Yeah, what if the golf ball lands in the tree and then falls in the lap, and how many? I mean, they're anticipating what if beforehand, but you can't possibly get all of them. So that's why you're modifying and updating your Constitution stuff. But for self-governing churches, it's important. I would think it would be important to have some kind of binding legal constitution to hold yourself accountable and safe from outside, inside stuff going on.
But
That's all
for sure.
But
I agree.
I feel like I have to mention, in relation to what I said earlier, most of those wacky rules in PGA's rule book are only in there because it happened.
Yeah, that's true. That's right. And
That is also true.
They didn't know they
And
had to
that,
happen
kids,
because
is
until
called
it
a
happened.
full circle moment.
yeah, there you go. There you go.
Oh man. All right. So with that, you guys know, we always like to wrap these things up with just a practical action. When we're thinking of polity, it's all practical. Everything we're doing is practical. So it's kind of hard to ask this question. I mean, it's sort of like, yeah, hey, listen to the episode and figure out your church's polity. But let's go more individual. If there is random person who's not named Joe, I got to do a different random. Bob. If Bob's sitting in his church and he's doesn't even know what his church polity is, how does he engage better in his own church's procedures and like all of these things talking about like the voting and all that? If Bob doesn't know, how can Bob know how to better participate in his church in these kind of ways that we're talking about? Will.
Oh man, that's a hard one. Like the practical ways. Like, yeah, I am not the person who's going to grab. I don't think I've read through my entire church constitution. I mean, when it comes up and I have a church council there and Robert's rules. But I think pay attention. Yeah, church communities are warm. They're welcoming, a place of belonging. They're a place of hearing God's word and equipping you to live your life of faith. But get to know your church a little better about, it's building policy, its constitution, its mission, its mission statement, its core values. Some of those things, it's not like we're going to quiz you and your salvation is going to be in jeopardy or in question if you don't answer the questions right. But, at least know your church's mission statement, at least know kind of its, the core beliefs and some of those things. So most churches have it on their website. Most churches have a big, thick binder in their church office that has their constitution. You don't have to read it all, but go a little deeper, other than just perhaps a Sunday morning worship service. There's nothing wrong with that. People need Sabbath and a chance to decompress from the rest of their life during the week where they have to pay attention to all the details. Sometimes you don't want church to be that space. But if you want to go deeper into kind of the community life of your church, then know what makes it healthy and what's binding or not.
Yeah. And Joe, if everyone tells us what Will's talking about, we're like do these research, we get more engaged in our church in this way, and everybody actually engages their church's procedures, their policies, and understand what their church believes about these things.
Yeah.
If everyone were to do that, what do you think we would see change in our local churches and all around us?
I think if people were I think if on both sides that folks were willing to dig in and be more interested in the goings on and all of that, and that churches were welcoming to folks asking those questions and all of that kind of stuff, then I think we'd see an increase in ownership within the church. Like that churches like this is my church. I have skin in the game here. And all of that, and we would see subsequently, I think, a tighter knit community within these small C churches, because everybody's coming together and feels that sense of belonging within the context of that church.
Oh yeah, man.
I like the word ownership. I like the word ownership and belonging. That's good, because I think that's a big part of wanting to be a part of something greater than yourself and how to participate. So that's a good word.
Yeah, that's actually one of those things. In my Christian leadership class when I was at Charleston Southern, they teach you like that's what part of good leadership. And these people who go around and teach leadership all around to different businesses around the U.S., a lot of them have to study some of these "How did Jesus lead" books. And that's one of the big things was ownership. He gave ownership to the disciples, right? And it was funny because I learned all that in school and it's kind of like abstract. And then I go to Harris Teeter, I go to Chipotle and all these things, and their values right up there is always going to be ownership.
Yep. So before we wrap up, we do our God moment. You all know, you've all been here. We just ask everyone to share a moment that they saw God in recently, whether it be a blessing, challenge, moment of worship, curse, anything like that. And I always make Josh go first to give the rest of us enough time to think about our God moment. So, Josh, you have a God moment for us this week.
I'm one of those crazy ones that if you go to a Pentecostal church, you've heard a million times probably, but I'm going to say it anyway. I had a surprise bill kind of come up, and I was like, oh man, I have no way to pay this. This stinks. I was really upset. And I actually prayed a lot about it. I was like, God, I don't know what I'm going to do with this bill. And then the next day, boom, in the mail is, hey, you put too much money in your retirement. We need to know what to do with this amount of money. That was exactly how much I needed. And I was like, oh, crazy. I guess I'm going to
How
pay that
about
bill
it?
that I have no way to pay. And then my check was a little bit more too. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. What am I going to do with this little more on my check? And I was like, you know what? I think it'd be cool if I paid this other bill my wife usually pays. And then I find out because of things with her card, different issues, she has to get a new card. She wasn't actually going to be able to do that. So when I went to surprise her and I was like, oh, this is going to be fun when she calls to do it, I was like, oh, well, she's stressing out about it. Let me tell you, I actually got really blessed. And then I shared that with you. And now you don't have to worry about it, which is, also me because, we share bills. But you guys know what I mean, I think. If you're married, you know what I mean, I think. Yeah. Yeah. So it was like a double whammy of, wow, God said, hey, what your needs are, I'm going to provide. And I was like, wow, Jehovah Jireh, that's crazy. And here we are.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was a good one.
So for me, this one's easy week. On the 10th, my nephew was born.
Yeah.
Nice.
Whoa,
Yeah,
Nice.
my second nephew.
that's pretty cool. Yeah,
9
you're
pounds.
such a good uncle. Like you give uncle vibes. I'm glad you're an uncle.
Yeah.
Cool uncle.
With
Cool
a mustache like that, you give
Yeah.
strong uncle vibes.
Yeah, I learned.
I
I
like
learned
it.
from one of the best, my uncle and his mustache.
Nice.
Perfect.
Yeah. So, Joe, do you have a God moment for us?
I do. Myself and really the rest of the team in various ways, we're walking through high volume seasons, both individually and as a team. It's a very heavy season. There was somebody who within the congregation who chose to remain anonymous, left us cards for Christmas, and it was just it was a gift to the pastoral team. That was just a moment of, you are seen, and all of that, and it was a reminder from within the context that the things that we do and the things that we walk our folks through matter, and all of that. So that was just that was a cool God moment.
Yeah.
Will, do you have a God moment for us this week?
I do. This past weekend, I was down in Charleston, and I was able to do the wedding for the flower girl that was in my wedding. The flower girl at my wedding got married. So not only do I feel old now, but the fact that this family that I met through being a camp counselor up at the North Carroll Mountains at a Lutheran camp, they were young and high chair and toddlers at the time when I met them when I was in college. But this family became really special to me and was really a big role model in showing me how to be a family and the kind of family I wanted. And I began this longing to have kids of my own through watching them and getting to know them and their kids. So I was like, I can't wait to have my own kids. So here is Megan, who I just adored when she was little and was the flower girl on my wedding. I'm turning around doing her wedding. So Cindy and I were able to go down there and do that full circle and see the family and voice our appreciation and voice again to them how important they are to us and modeling for us how to be good parents. And so, yeah.
Praise God.
That was awesome.
That's cool.
That's amazing.
I met some cool kids through church camp too. I still
Probably
talk to
not.
at least one of them.
Did they have
So-
mustaches then?
Not then.
A little bit. So if you enjoyed the episode or if you hated the episode, please consider sharing it with a friend, enemy, share it with a cousin. We all have at least one of those
Preferably.
3 things.
Probably.
And then if you're listening to this on the AMP Network YouTube channel, thank you very much, and hit like and subscribe, or else,
Not or else, but
or
please.
else.
Yeah, I'm going with
I'll start
please.
begging.
And if you're on the YouTube channel, not all of our shows are on that YouTube channel, but some of them have their own YouTube channels. Some of them have other shows, but you can go to Spotify or Apple Podcasts. They both have a place where you can just find the whole channel and see all of the shows there, from the homily with Pastor Will to the Bible After Hours with the Foul Mouthed Preacher. It is crazy stuff, fun stuff over there. Check it out.
Yeah, we hope you enjoyed it. Coming up soon, we'll be talking with Eric Nevins, founder of the Christian Podcast Association, about the state of Christian podcasts. Pretty sure it's called Vatican City or something. After our Christmas break, we'll be interviewing Jared Baez about his newest book, Love Matters More. And Pete Enns will be back on to discuss various takes on biblical inerrancy and his absence from Theology Beer Camp and how we can disagree about this. And finally, at the end of season 1, Francis Chan will be joining us.
Yeah, he doesn't know though, so someone does have to tell him.
Yeah,
Please. Yeah, it's been so long. Joe is so tired of hearing me say this.
I love that half of
Will
the
loves
I'm
it.
not on here for months, and half of the gimmicks are still in place. I love it.
Yeah, it's been years.
100%.
The gimmicks do not change. Come back next week. Hear it again. Francis Chan, eventually.